This is the message to Joe Gallagher. Stay strong, and I hope you're well, mate. Love from Porky. And peace out.
Hey, and welcome back to the number one podcast in the sport, where I guess we're just going to touch on a little bit of everything today. Like, the boxing world seems to have just moved so much in the last 7 days that there's a lot to jump into, right? So let's do that. But before we do that, I just want to shout out Joe Gallagher. By the time you guys listen to this, you'd have seen the announcement that he has stage 4 bowel and liver cancer, which, do you know what I mean? What do you say to that? Apart from, you can send your prayers. And it's an odd one because I'd heard stuff. I think when you do a pod, you get loads of stuff in your inbox from people, and they'll tell you, look, I've heard this, I've heard that. And so when I heard it, my instincts were, number one, dismiss it, because one, it's either not true, or if it is true, he would just want all the privacy in the world, because, and I lived through this with my old man, watching proud men have to deal with maybe their biggest battle, it's not always good, because you have good days and bad days, and they probably just want to be seen on their good days. And so that privacy is really, really important. And I imagine what will happen now is Joe will be around those close to him, and he'll do the best he can while he can. And what we hope is, the right treatments in place, and that, this cancer goes into remission, because, Joe's having a fantastic second act, and we'd like to see him have a third, fourth, and fifth act. So personally, I send my prayers up to Joe. I hope we all send our prayers up to Joe. But at this time, let's give him the space and the privacy he needs and deserves. I probably won't speak on it again. It's just that there's an announcement today, so I think it's an opportune moment to do so. I think he's probably factored in this time to address it. But after this, give the man his privacy, and we can only do what we can or what we're required to do. And, I send love and prayers his way, 100%. So we got to start with Derek, right? The Derek Chisora train keeps it chugging on. And I can't explain to you how Derek is literally the last man standing from his era. Price long retired, Fury retired. All the other guys kind of never really bubbled up the way they should have done. And it's just Derek from that era. Even Bellew's gone now. So it's just Derek who survived. And my only conclusion is he's the last of the real hard men boxing. And I don't mean hard man as in, street reputations. I mean hard man as in doesn't really get injured. Seems to be able to recover from knockouts better than everybody else. Seems to just be able to regenerate. Derek Chisora is almost like Wolverine. Because if you look at his body now versus when he started, there's not that much difference. He's just older and thicker, which happens when you train. His skill set's not vastly improved. Like, he hasn't all of a sudden found magical punches. He's still Derek. But what I saw in the Wallin fight was someone who's prepared to learn, because you could see he was looking for that counter right hand down the middle. He had seen that it worked for Joshua, and he's like, if I can land one of these, I can cause him havoc. Now, when you fight Otto Wallin, you always have a chance. And I remember Otto Wallin from when I lived in Sweden, and this would have been before he turned pro. And just around that Swedish scene, there were some pretty good guys like Babakar Kamara. Oh man, the African kid who fought Boatsi in 2016. Kennedy Katende, that's his name. He was there. And there were a few other really, really good kids. Anna Laurel was bubbling around. And so I was able to do some ring time with a lot of these guys, and Otto Wallin was one of them. Otto Wallin's a big dude, by the way. When you see him in person, he's a big guy. But once you set about him, you don't feel that size. And that's the best feeling you'll ever have in a boxing ring, is when you think someone's going to be destructive and it turns out they're not. And so the beating you thought you were going to take isn't the beating, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, if it's just going to be this, let my hands go. And so I've always had that feeling about Otto Wallin, that until he discovers some power from somewhere, he's always going to be easy to deal with. And that's why I always found the Fury fight odd, because Tyson Fury couldn't deal with him. And maybe that's what made Usyk confident that he'd beat Tyson Fury. Fury just could not figure out a southpaw. And we'll talk about Tyson Fury another time, but I want you to remember this. Fury couldn't figure out a southpaw. He was confused. Anything that's not bread and butter for Fury confuses him. Ngannou confused him. Usyk confused him. Cunningham confused him. There are loads of guys who have confused Tyson Fury because they're unconventional in his eyes, right? But when you're super conventional, you're kind of easy to deal with. But Del Boy wins, right? Comfortable decision. Drops Wilding twice. One of the knockdowns is kind of highlight reel where he just knocked him across the ring. And you look at that and go, the fact that they were able to make money out of Wilding the way they have, credit where credit's due to, is it Salita that promotes him? Because that's him done. And now you almost think, well, maybe Salita should have been nicer to Jarrell Miller because there's more mileage in Miller than there is in Wilding. And on reflection, the Miller-Chisora fight would have been the fight. And maybe that's going to be Derek's, is it 50th that's coming up? Maybe that's going to be the one, him versus Miller. And that would be a hell of a fight. But let's just go back to Derek, because everyone's got different views on whether he should carry on boxing or not. He doesn't sound like James Toney, which gives me hope. He doesn't sound like Danny Williams, which also gives me hope. There are loads of boxers who don't sound great, and Derek's not there yet. He's never sounded amazing, so you're kind of measuring him against him. But he's been able to do this. And I think, like I said, there's him being a hard man is one thing. That toughness is important. But I also think it's work rate. A lot of these heavyweights are now coming into the game and they don't have a lot of work rate. They're big guys and they throw one or two punches, kind of pose a bit, look around, and then throw another one or two until they get you hurt. And then they'll start flurrying. I think Johnny Fisher's a good example where Dave was able to outwork him. I don't necessarily think Dave is bigger or stronger than Johnny Fisher. He just outworked him. It happened with Courtney Bennett and Nick Webb, where Nick was able to outwork him. I've seen it happen a lot with our heavyweight prospects, especially. They're getting outworked, and they're getting outworked because a lot of times people don't understand how to train big guys. And the thing with a big guy is this: if you can train your big guy to have an engine and some work rate, he'll go a long, long way, like Derek's showing. Whereas if you just teach him, want to knock everyone out, eventually you're not. Then what do? You've got nothing to fall back on. And I think that's kind of what hurt Joshua. Like, Joshua went from being a high work rate guy to being a low work rate guy. And by being a low work rate guy, he gave more opportunities to his opponents. And now he can't get that high work rate guy back because he's the wrong age and his body said, nah, we're not doing that. So I don't know how he's going to rediscover it. But I think if I was a heavyweight right now, I'd be looking to add 30 to 40% to my punch output. I'd be adding that to my training. I'd be really working on work rate because we're going to see it now. You're going to see smaller, more active heavyweights start to make more of a name for themselves. And Usyk's shown that it's relatively easy to do, which isn't to disrespect his achievements. But if you can outwork these heavyweights, it's a wrap. And we're going to touch on Lawrence in a minute. But if you can kind of get to those levels of work rate, guys like Okoli and Riakpo could cause havoc in the heavyweight division. Before we talk about the other fights, one thing I wanted to say as well about the Chisora fight, which was really interesting, was it looked like it was a 16-inch ring, a 16-foot ring. 16-inch, what the hell am I talking about? It looked like it was a 16-foot ring, which, for me, pro boxing-wise is small. Like, if I've got two heavyweights, if I've got a 6'6" heavyweight, and I'm looking after Derek, I'm getting a 16-foot ring. If I'm looking after Otto Wallin, I want 22. Do you know what I mean? Like, that makes all the difference because for a big guy like Wilding, you suddenly realize there's no escape. And I understand why Derek said what he said in the press conference, where he said there'll be no boxing, we're fighting. And that 16-foot ring is exactly what happened. And people don't talk about this a lot, but ring size is really important. Like, you'd see someone like a Klitschko. Klitschko go for the biggest ring he can because he likes to move and create distance and space. Whereas You know, if you're more about really just pressuring your guy, you want a 16 foot. And, you know, Wilder paid a heavy price for that. That's why you saw him hop across the ring like that. But it's just a reminder, always try and have a look at the size of the ring, and I will tell you what kind of fight you're going to have for your main event. And if you're looking after boxers, make sure you get as much leverage on the ring size as you can. In terms of the Saturday show, I've got to talk about Masoud Abdullah. Obviously, like Maz is a friend. He's a guy I know really well. And he was fighting Zach Miller. And people just look and go, I don't know who Zach Miller is. That doesn't mean he's a bad kid. Zach Miller's from that kind of generation of... who would you put in that mix? He's a little bit older than Eddie Scottney, but they're kind of all kind of generationally the same. Brandon Deward and all these sorts of guys. That's kind of the stock he comes from. So he would have been in and around the top ends of his age group as a junior coming through. Probably touching a few finals. I don't think he won any, but he was competent enough. You know, one of those kids where you talk about him and people just nod their heads and go, yeah, he's decent. So he's always been decent. And so is Maz. Like, let's not forget, Maz has accolades to his name too. Well, unfortunately, Maz didn't win his opportunity for the British and Commonwealth. As an outsider looking in, so I wasn't really close to the camp. I'm just watching as a fan at this point. I felt he just followed Zach Miller. And sometimes you can do that when you're used to cracking the spirit and, you know what I mean, making people kind of avoid you. You become a seek and destroy guy. And there are times where seek and destroy is absolutely brilliant. But someone like Miller, where you're like, I think he's seen this before. You got to give him a different impression. You've almost got to give him what he's not expecting initially. Definitely for the first 2 or 3 rounds. Instead of just going after him and going, I'm going to hurt him, sometimes you just got to be like, let me go backwards a bit and see what happens. See what he does when I take a step back. See if I can force him to make the fight. And if he makes the fight, what sort of fighter is he? And we've become so obsessed in boxing with this idea of a game plan, right? Because we hear it all the time. Yes, stuck to the game plan. Coach had a great game plan. And it annoys me because there's no game plan. I don't care what anyone says, there's no game plan. And the reason you know there's no game plan is no trainer worth their salt would ever write down how the fight goes before the fight, leave it on the commentator's desk, and then after the fight we can read it and go, did the fight go that way? It doesn't happen. Because so many things can happen in a fight that you're not expecting. That's the whole point. Good coaching is me giving you something you don't expect and then realizing you haven't prepared for it and then just leaning into that. So it felt to me a bit like maybe Maz was leaning on a game plan that had worked before. Whereas sometimes I think you got to look at the opponent and go, okay, where are we right now in the ring? And it could be as simple as, okay, this guy just wants to play around on the perimeter of the ring. Cool. I'm not going to play that game. I'm going to bring it back to the middle. So you might feint the jab, double step back, come back into the middle, make Miller move. Because at some point, Miller's going to have to make the fight. You know, you can't always be the one making the fight. Because I felt 2 things would be true. I felt Masoud would have definitely done a lot more damage if he had forced Miller to come forward. I don't think Miller's that great coming forward. But also, I think if he had just gone and said, you know, since I let my jab go, I'm just going to go jab, right hook to the body, left hook to the body, right uppercut, or finish on the straight right. In my gym, we just call it giving someone 4, right? 4 really basic shots, but shots that you're going to see and you're going to hear. And the judges are going to see and hear that. Because Miller was just throwing singles and doubles. And he was only ever going to do that for the whole fight. Because he knew as soon as you start anchoring your feet and letting your hands go, you're going to get turned to toast. And so I was watching that fight and I was like, in Maz's situation at this point, just disengage. Don't follow him. But sometimes when you feel I'm not getting the joy, you kind of double down. Psychologically, you can double down. And that's when you need a clear head to go, actually, what we're going to do now is we're just going to change the fundamental canvas of this fight. And that's the big learning, I think, with Maz. And maybe that's what separates like those guys like your Barreras, Morales. They know where they are. Physically and psychologically, in every fight, they know where they are and they know what's needed. And so they know when to put the foot on the accelerator and they know when to take a round off. Like you see Usyk do it. Like Usyk might just be chilling for round 6 and 7 and you go, oh, maybe Usyk's a bit tired. Maybe he's a bit hurt. And then 8 and 9, he puts his foot back down and he goes, now you got to live with me. And after round 9, you're like, okay, now we got 10, 11, and 12. And are you really about these last 3 rounds? And so it's that ability to actually manage the dynamics of a fight. But I thought Maz did well. I think his name is enhanced. So I don't think that loss to Miller did him any harm at all. But the key thing now is to learn from that and go, I need to have like 2 or 3 recipe books in every fight. So if someone is on the back foot, I know that I don't have to give in to that. I mean, let me go on the back foot in that case. If someone's pushing me forward and wanting me to go back, no, I'm going to push him forward. I'm going to push him forward. I'm going to bully him and see what happens. If someone wants to just pot shot, cool. Let's see if you can pot shot when I'm hitting you 6 times. Yeah, because those punches will start to take a toll. And it's those little things that just come with time and experience. But I fully expect to see Maz up at that level again pretty soon. Rebuild him, bring him back, and he will win the British and Commonwealth titles, and he will be a factor. But this is one of those things where there's never a great time to take a loss, but there are good times to take a loss. And sometimes an opportunity like this is good because you're not so deep into your career that you can't make the changes. So now it's entirely up to him, but I thought it was a good performance, but I just think Miller came prepared. So you got to also remember, in Maz's case, sometimes you're a victim of your own success because people are seeing you do damage to good kids and they go, you ain't about to do that to me. You know what I mean? I am not engaging. And you've got to almost take responsibility for being dangerous and then go, okay, what other ways can I get to these people? What traps can I set for them? How can I bait them into my kind of fight? But listen, that will all come. I have no doubt about that. In terms of the rest of the card, probably got to talk about Nathan Heaney. And if you remember after the Denzel fight, and I kept telling people, there were reasons why Denzel performed the way he did. And I said, Nathan Heaney will not rematch Denzel because the rematch will not go past 5 rounds. And that's not to disrespect Nathan Heaney's skills. He said it himself. He's been boxing since he was a kid. But there was a lack of resilience in him that you can't explain. Like the way Brad took him apart in 2 fights as well. That kind of let you know what would have happened if Denzel had been in the right mind frame to really set about him. But I don't want to disrespect Nathan Heaney. I thought against Sofiane Kati, he just met a hard man. You know, sometimes they're just these hard men that can break you down. They're not super athletes or physique's not like a bodybuilder, nothing like that. They're just hard men. And if they weren't boxing, they'd be causing havoc somewhere else. You know, like another guy I think of when I think of those sorts of guys, Darryl Williams, who, by the way, might be on his way back, which would be good. Because the thing is, paradoxically, Zach Parker's career hasn't really moved on. They could probably rematch now and it would still be competitive. But back to Nathan Heaney, Heaney was getting... You know, watching Heaney get beaten up like that, I didn't even enjoy it because I quite like Nathan Heaney. Nathan Heaney's what every boxer should be. Started at the grassroots, built his fan base, built his sponsorship community, always showed love to his fans, always showed love to his sponsors, knew how to hit the marks when it came to the media, knew how to position himself. You know what I mean? He never made any enemies, just a thoroughly nice guy. Like one of those guys in boxing, you're like, okay, whatever his blueprint was, young guys, follow it. Because he had a lot of the things right. He was just underpowered. And I think maybe a resilience issue as well would just be my take on it. You can go so far by being a skillful boxer, but there's a point where you got to be tough because you're in there with really, really tough people. Like, you know, you get some of those Ghanaians and Congolese kids come through. They're tough as anything. And if you don't have, you know, like the kind of hammer to break them down, it's going to be really, really hard for you. Now, does Nathan Heaney retire? I hope not, man. Let him have a run at 168. I don't see why not. Let him go at super mid, see if the extra 8 pounds in weight give him something. And I wouldn't be surprised because he's quite a tall guy. But I'd like to see him just have one last crack. I don't want him to go out like that. Like, let him go out. If he's going to go out, Give him a domestic dust-up. Let him jump in with a Zach Chelly. If Zach Chelly wants to stay at 168, why doesn't he just jump in with Zach? That'd be a good fight. All those sorts of considerations, but big salute to Nathan Heaney for what he's done for boxing. Like, I mean, how many of us knew where Stoke was really before Nathan Heaney? More importantly, how many of us knew that they sang Delilah? Because I know I didn't. But, no, big salute to him. What also happened to the rest of the card? Zach Parker boxed. Yawn. No interest in that. Jack Rafferty, for all the people who love Jack. Okay, great. But that's not why we tuned into the card, if we're being brutally honest, right? We didn't tune in for Jack Rafferty. We tuned in for Maz. We tuned in for Derek. We tuned in for Lewis Williams, didn't we? Interesting that Lewis Williams is now campaigning at heavyweight, because I think he did his AMs at like the amateur heavyweight, which is kind of like cruiserweight. And so I'm intrigued to see how he goes, because he's going to have to pack on a bit of lumber pretty quick, as Lawrence has shown. Like, you know, because Lewis is what, 6'5", 6'6". He's a big kid, but he hasn't filled his frame out yet. But he could be someone decent. You know, I hope he is, if I'm being brutally honest, because we need that. And that means Queensberry have what, 13, 14 heavyweights? The monopoly is real. Their monopoly over big men is absolutely real. And, I mean, that can only be good for boxing. That means that we're going to see a lot of big men going at each other. Royal Rumble time, do you know what I mean? Survivor Series type business. So that's going to be really good. But overall, I thought that was a solid card. Like, and I was asked this question by a friend of mine, Matthew Tinker. Shout out to Matthew Tinker. Shame that we never got him fighting on a Sky show in the UK, which, you know, is what it is, but that was a real shame. But he asked me why Derek's fighting in Manchester. And my theory on it is this. Number one, I think that Co-op Live Arena is just trying to get logos on. So, like, we want to get all of these events here just to, number one, test the venue. Because they're still testing it, by the way. Yeah, there'll be little adjustments they make. So, I'm sure the discount was healthy. Whereas with the O2, you don't really have to discount the O2 because people want to play there. So I imagine Derek's looked at the numbers and gone, I'm going to sell the same number of tickets in each venue, but my split is a lot better here because the venue's cheaper to hire. And also, just logistically, you can have people come in from, and Northern guys, please do not crucify me for my geography. You can pull guys in from Liverpool in the West, right? Liverpool, Merseyside, Birkenhead, whatever. Yeah, you can pull people in from that side. And then if you kind of go around the clock, you talk about places like Wigan, Blackburn, Burnley, Oldham, down into Manchester. They can all come in, even from like Lancaster, Morecambe, if they fancy the drive. Then if you look the other way, you got Leeds, Bradford, Huddersfield, those parts of Yorkshire like Cleckheaton and Batley. They can all kind of come in a reasonable time. Sheffield as well. Let's not ignore that. Leeds. And once you start adding up the catchment area there, that's a pretty big catchment area for boxing. And if you can make the economics work, why wouldn't you have more fights then? I can see that being one of the hubs for boxing now. Between Liverpool, Manchester and Leeds, you're going to start seeing that. Although Liverpool's a bit further out, so it's a bit harder. Liverpool's really for the locals. But Manchester will pull people in. The only issue is, as an outsider, you're going to struggle to find a decent hotel. That's probably the only thing. It's the same problem in Leeds as well. But real smart planning by Derek. You know, how do I maximize my money? I fight in Manchester. And be interested to see where he goes next. I imagine he'll be fighting in Saudi next. He's waited a long time for his Saudi moment, so hopefully he gets that against Jerome Miller. That's what I'd like to see. So we actually stayed in Manchester for the next big boxing story, didn't we? So that's the opening Queensberry card on DAZN, and well, that's going to be a lot to talk about. So, fights people really care about. Dillian Whyte versus Joe Joyce. Obviously, this is a crossroads fight. One of them will rise, one of them will fall. And then we've got Richard Riakporhe versus Lawrence Okolie. Finally, like a fight we've wanted for about 4 years minimum. And we're going to get that at heavyweight, which for me is more intriguing for a number of reasons. One, how big is Richard going to come in at? Will Richard stay 220 and then leave Lawrence at about 2 I think Lawrence will box as a heavyweight around 248, 250. And then we've got David Adelaide versus Jamie TKV, which is an intriguing fight. I think that's a really, really stellar fight. That could be the sleeper fight of the evening. And I think on that night, we're also going to see the debut of Delicious Ori, right? So he was our 2024 Olympian. And that's going to be interesting because mixed reviews about him. The fact that he went looking at wrestling tells me he wasn't an overwhelming candidate to be signed. So I'm actually really intrigued at what you're going to do with him, because he's got this time period to himself, really, if you think about it. And they'll move him on quickly. I think he'll fight 4 times this year, minimum. And then once you start getting into that range, you're closing in on the guys that you probably met in the amateurs. So do you match him that way, or do you just kind of match him like you are with Moses and just kind of keep him off the beaten track? I'd like to see his debut against someone like a Phil Williams, right? Someone who's not there to fall over. Let's do that, because that's going to give us a good benchmark of where he's at. Let's not rush him into anything crazy, because he's definitely a guy who's got some learning to do, but he's not young. So you can't drag your feet with him. None of these guys are young, so it's all got to happen pretty quick. And look, when it comes to developing heavyweights, we're all learning, man. Like, it's not as easy as you would think on paper. But I just want to touch on this Manchester thing, because this card is also on in Manchester. That's a big card for Manchester, actually. That's a lot of depth. But it's also a lot of Southerners on that card. And that's going up to Manchester. So how many people are going to travel up from London? Not many. Which makes me feel that not only is there an economic advantage to doing it in Manchester, that you can fill out the arena without London, you've now forced the people in London and the Southeast to watch. On where? DAZN. So Frank can say, look at who I've brought to DAZN in a short space of time. That'll be intriguing. Now, will people follow Frank to DAZN? I don't know. Because if there's no more boxing on TNT, what are you watching TNT for? You're still going to keep your TNT subscription, because you need it for the Champions League. You might need it for the rugby. You definitely need it for some of the Prem games. And if you like rallying, that's where you go. And then the kind of wider discovery package for Eurosport, etc., right? So you still need it. Do you want to take on that extra subscription to watch Queensberry? Probably not, which would tell me that DAZN probably has all the subscribers in the UK they're going to get. Like, we see that they're losing like 1.2 billion a year now. So really, really dicey times for boxing, where the economics of boxing are not sustainable. Like, boxing's not paying for itself right now. And there's only so long people will accept boxing not paying for itself until they just go, no, we're done with it. And then we'll have to move down the income ladder again and go, guys, we've got to reboot this whole sport. So just be very careful. Keep an eye on that, because if this consolidation play doesn't work for DAZN, there's nothing left they can do. Absolutely nothing left they can do in regards to boxing. And it's the same with Turkey. Like, if you're not getting the bump that you were getting a year ago, why would you keep spending the money? You wouldn't. So let's keep an eye on that. But in terms of the card, Dillian versus Joe, it's just who's got what left, in my opinion. And I think Joe's got a bit more left, just simply because he just hasn't got the Dillian White miles. He hasn't got the kickboxing miles. He hasn't got the Miguel's miles. He hasn't got the miles from sparring in all of those camps miles. Dillian's just got more mileage on him. And Dillian's had some, he had the Povetkin, he had the Joshua kind of knockouts. He's had a lot of damage done to him as well. Been dropped by Rivas, I think he was dropped by Parker. Do you know what I mean? So, Joe has a chance, but if Joe can't put his hands up, no one's even saying, Joe, move your head anymore. It's just, Joe, put your hands up. Yeah, you got big forearms. Take the punches on there, please. Just stop playing around. That's what I'd like to see from Joe. Just something really, really simple, like keeping your hands up. It's Dillian White. Like, Dillian's not going to do anything super complicated. Do you know what I mean? Like, whatever people want to say about Buddy McGirt, he ain't going to teach you to be super complicated. We've already seen that with the case studies. He's not a man that delivers those kinds of results. So for me, I'd make Joe the slight favourite in that. But you never know with Dillian. Dillian's just got that left hook that can detonate from anywhere, anytime. But yeah, I'd make Joe a 60-40 favourite in that one. TKV versus Adelaide. I think Jamie's a slight favourite and people won't understand why. But if you've seen the sparring, you'll understand why. That's why those two were super respectful to each other. Because they know when those two, it's going to be a hard fight for both guys. If Adam Booth has put anything into David Adelaide, it makes the fight slightly closer. But I think the best version of Jamie TKV would beat David Adelaide. On experience, on style, I think it's more style. Like, Jamie's just going to maul, and he's going to make David work. Like, this is going to be a work rate fight. Yeah. And so you got to have that work rate. And if David's training for that work rate, then cool. If he's not, hard day at the office. Now, you see, the Okoli Riakporhe thing's interesting. Because, like, I've seen both of those guys come up. And they're not natural rivals. Although you look at them, you look at height, weight, one's from Southeast, one's from East. Career-wise, they overlapped. But you never got the feeling that they were natural rivals. Just never. And I can't explain why. So this has all been kind of created in the pro ranks, right? And then it was kind of anchored by what happened at that premiere. And Lawrence has so eloquently explained what he said. That's obviously in the intro that you guys have heard already. But it's hard to build up that kind of tension. I think Lawrence's thing is just, I'm better than all of these guys. I just want to prove it. Now, whether he goes after Joshua at some point, I don't know. But my own opinion is, this is a fight where, for a long time we've said if Richard lands that right hand, it's over for anyone. But Billum Smith survived. A few people are now like, yeah, no, we can take that shot. And at heavyweight, I don't know if you can get away with it. Lawrence will have 50 odd pounds extra to absorb those shots with. So they're still going to hit the same. Now, what people say is the power is still real in both hands. Can you throw those shots when there's someone just as big as you firing off their heavyweight shots as well? And then if it gets up close and physical, are you stronger than Lawrence? All of these things are yet to be determined, but this is what's going to make this fight really, really interesting. You've got a guy in Lawrence who I think genuinely has a point to prove versus a guy like Richard. I don't know if Richard has a point to prove. And, all right, let's talk about this. There are two kinds of people I think you generally meet at the top level in boxing. There are guys who are good at it, and there are guys that love it. Like, you'll have elements of both in you, by the way. But there are some guys, and I put Tyson Fury in the camp of they're good at it. Right? Fury is good at it, but Fury likes boxing when he's better than the other guy. He doesn't like finding out if he's better than the other guy. That's why you hear him talk the way he does. He went after Wilder because he didn't think Wilder was a good enough boxer. He went after Joshua because he thought Joshua was just a big muscle man. He went after Ngannou because he's just an MMA guy. He'll go after people where he thinks there's a massive gulf in class. Compare that with someone like Usyk, and I think Usyk just loves to box. And that's why it's easy for him to be in the gym. It's easy for him to do the diet. It's easy for him to watch his weight. It's easy for him to do these things because he loves the sport. I don't know if Fury loves the sport. And translating that to Richard, I don't know if Richard loves the sport. I think he loves being good at it. And he is good at it. But I don't know if Richard's that guy who, if he wasn't boxing professionally, would be gloving up somewhere doing something. I don't know if that's Richard. I don't know if anyone knows the answer to that. But that's what it's going to come down to for me. Who's the guy that loves this game enough to squeeze an extra 20% out of each session, each sparring, each run, each weight session? You know what I mean? Who's got that in them? And also, who can make the adjustment to being a bigger guy first? And my feeling is Lawrence might be a bit ahead in in that department. But look, let's see how it goes. But life is getting really, really interesting. And if you think about it, it's just been announced that we've got Liam Cameron versus Ben Whittaker. Was it April 20th in Birmingham? No idea who else was on the card, but it was good that we had closure on that. I think the date's been locked in for a while. They've just been going back and forth over the exact terms and conditions of the fight. Now, here's my honest take on it, and you gotta remember, like, I'm quite close to the Whittaker camp. Like, messages are exchanged. Do you know what I mean? And got a lot of time and respect. Like, I'm a Ben Whittaker fan, you know. But it would be remiss of me not to talk about this honestly. He got a reality check against Liam Cameron. That's what he got. He got a reality check, and it was a reality check that said, "Mate, what you're doing may not be what you need to be doing to win you that world title." And now the question is, can he overcome that? Because Liam Cameron is now more confident. Now, you know, remember, Liam went in there just as cannon fodder. Let's not lie. Like, he was there to make Ben look good. Liam came out of it looking good. Now Liam's like, I'm Liam Cameron. I'm 2009 ABA champion. I would have been at London 2012 if I'd listened to the people around me. I am Liam Cameron. You know, and you can see in Liam now, people are showing him some love, but he's a grounded guy. Do you know what I mean? Domestic responsibilities at home and all that. Liam's a grounded guy. And he's going to keep grinding in that gym. So whatever the result is in April, I can promise you now, Ben Whittaker's going to have to show he's tougher than he was in Saudi. And that's going to be good for him. If he overcomes Ben Whittaker, you fast track him. And you go, right, he beat Ben comfortably. Beat Liam comfortably. Now he goes and fights, I don't know, Spider or whoever. Or actually, no, a fight I'd like to see, and I don't know how quick we can do this, would be Carol Atalma versus Ben Whittaker. But that might be fanciful at the moment. But yeah, put Ben in the mix with all of these people. Put Ben in with Louis Edmondson. Just, what if he beats Liam, you can't faff around. If he loses to Liam, he can't faff around either. Do you know what I mean? Like, he's just got to get it cracking and see what he can get out of the sport while he can. So I think it's interesting. Like, Liam's just like, he's betting with house money. He's loving it. Because if Liam wins, world's his oyster. If Liam loses, he goes down to 168, the world's his oyster. He just has to perform to the best of his ability, and there'll be an opportunity for him. And that makes him very, very dangerous, because all he has to do is fight. But all Liam loves to do is fight. Like we were talking earlier, there are people who love being better than the other guy in the ring. Then there are people who are like, I don't care if I'm better or if I'm worse. We're fighting. Let's see who's got what. And I think that's where Liam Cameron is at the moment. And look, I'm looking forward to that fight. I think that's a really good event. You never know if I'll go to that. Yeah, I might. Let me. That's one of those I'm going to think about. It depends on where I am life-wise, but that's an intriguing one for me. Really, really intriguing. I'm not sure if I talked about the Savannah Marshall situation, right? So if you remember when they announced Jonas versus, what's the young Welsh lady called? My memory's going. This is really bad. Lauren Price. My memory's bad. Like, I don't know what sort of day I'm having. So they announced Jonas versus Price at the Royal Albert Hall. All female card, blah, 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 blah. And then it all started to unravel, like Dubois' situation, Savannah Marshall's situation, and then it became clear like the money ain't what they thought it was going to be, right? Because you can't just have a bunch of marketing twats in an office and go, right, what should we do next? Oh, it's just an all-female card. Loads of women will come. It's like, well, what experience do you have about getting women to buy boxing tickets? It's not easy. There's already a case study, Shields versus Marshall, where loads of those had to be given away. And so they started to scale back what they wanted to do, which is fair enough. It's good business discipline, right? No, we're not paying what we don't have to pay. So Sav and Karen, I think, are off the card. I might be wrong on this. And instead, I don't even know, like, they got like Chloe Watson or whoever. Like, they basically just found some nail technicians, haven't they? Just to pad out the card. It's just loads of nail technicians and, I don't know, bank tellers, right? That's what they're really digging out at this point. And you're almost like, just admit you got it wrong, okay? Keep the headline and just put your prospects on there. right? If you got some London kids that will sell tickets, this would have been a really, really good time, an opportune time to put someone like Yusuf Kamari on a show in London, right? Some London kids you could put on that have a reputation. Instead, you're going to go and find, I don't even know, Hansel and fucking Gretel and just put them on the show. This is why Frank's winning, if we're being honest. This is why Frank's winning. If you look right now, okay, I just said earlier, Frank's got 13 heavyweights. How many has Eddie got? I don't know. That's Johnny Fisher. Johnny Fisher, Anthony Joshua, and who else? Oh, Hergovich. No, who cares? But my point is, look at how Frank has seemingly taken over British boxing, where he can go into zone and he could do card after card after card after card and crowd Eddie out, and Eddie wouldn't have an answer to it. Because think about it, most of Eddie's names are either in Australia or America. So give him those slots, give him the graveyard shift, and let Frank do prime time in this country, because he seems to know what he's doing. And this has all been done so silently, so intelligently, and with such discipline. And when they do a documentary on this, at some point they're going to be talking about George Warren and how George is almost the Michael Corleone of the whole thing, where he just sees the bigger picture, and he'll move beyond the disrespect and the tension and the legacy. He'll move beyond that and go, what deals need to be done? What deals benefit Queensberry? But be left in no doubt, the goal of Queensberry is to crush Matchroom. That's a non-negotiable. When you hear Matchroom are out of boxing, there'll be celebrations in Queensberry Towers. They won't talk about it publicly. They don't need to. But this is a family feud. Barry and Frank don't like each other, but they have to do business. So the only way they don't have to do business is if one of them goes. And remember, Matchroom tried. Matchroom tried when Frank went on to Box Nation and Hearn was crowing and laughing and ha ha ha. That was because they were like, yo, this is the end of Queensberry. Frank came back. Just came back. Luckily not like Warren Gatland, but he came back and he rebuilt. And now it swung the other way. Now it's like, can they kick Eddie out of UK boxing? I don't know if that's possible or not, but they can definitely keep him away from the money. But that's going to be an interesting one to see how Frank plays out on DAZN, because he could end up controlling DAZN. And that wouldn't be a bad thing. I imagine Frank and Selene would have better conversations than the Hearns would with Selene, because Frank gets it. Frank knows what works in real detail. But it's a lesson. Like, you can't be an arsehole your whole life and take the piss and disrespect people. We remember the impressions of Eubank Sr. We remember the mocking of Frank Warren. We remember the mocking of Shelley Finkel. See, I nearly did it. Yeah. We remember the mocking of Bob Arum. Remember the mocking of Leonard Ellaby. All this stuff is stuff we remember. So as Eddie's significance in boxing reduces and reduces and reduces, as his stick wears thin with the people who traditionally worship him, I'm of the view now that with 2 or 3 years of Hearn just going, I want to leave all this to Frank Smith to run. I'm going to go and join Reform. I'm going to go and join the Tories. It doesn't matter. I'm going to try and be Prime Minister. Because that's all that's left for his ego to do, unless he decides to move to America full time. And I don't know what he'd do over there, but good luck to him. I just think there's never going to be a better opportunity for Queensberry to deal with Matchroom and the Hearns than right now. And the worst thing they can do is blow it, which would be my opinion. But yeah, what else do we need to talk about? Keyshawn Davis versus Dennis Berinchik. When I hear a press conference and the first thing a boxer says is, you sent bananas and watermelon to my room, I say this is a problem. Because there'll be people that defend him and say, oh, he was just being ignorant, he didn't really know. But we never call ignorance when guys come off boats and start putting their hands on 15-year-old girls, even though in their country it's normal, right? And they just haven't learned that here it's not. But we never say that they're ignorant. We just say there's no excuse. But you've never given I mean, like, there's never a no excuse requirement when it comes to race. But look, at the end of the day, those two have got to fight. Keyshawn Davis has to get that win, and only after that win can we talk in depth about the bananas and watermelon. But if that's where we're at in boxing, and if that's what people want to sign off on in boxing, you understand that we've got far bigger problems than referee scorecards. It's really, really disappointing. Other things to touch on. Congratulations to Ellis Trowbridge. He boxed out in Alicante for Team GB, came home with a gold. I always think winning those golds is important because GB look at you and they go, can you box? Yes. Can you box in our environment? Yes. Can we send you out to tournaments and win? If the answer to that is yes, yeah, you're now in Olympic consideration. Those things are really, really important. So I'm glad that he's got that because you got to remember, that young man had a busted shoulder for a while and, you know, people were saying, he might not come back. But he's back, and that's the important thing. I like him. I think he's a good kid. I think he's good for British amateur boxing at the moment. Part of a really good intake of people of various ages. Him, Adam Maka, Leo Atang, etc. Carrigan from up in Cumbria. Loads of really good kids. So, you know, I just wanted to shout him out. I don't think there's much else to talk about for now, man. I might come back with something else. You know, bear with me. But I just wanted to sort of just do that quick roundup because we haven't had a chance to. And also, you know, that the Joe G news kind of hit me and sort of jolted me into action. But I want to touch on that as well and just say, guys, whether you, man, woman, whoever you are listening to this, don't take your health for granted. Definitely not past a certain age. Just go and get checked up. Get your heart checked up. Get your lung function checked. Get your main organs. Just get them all checked. And when you get a clean bill of health, good. You know, I'm not going to tell you to live super healthy, eating boiled rice and boiled chicken, because there's no fun in that. But keep on top of your health markers because, you know, we want to be on this earth for as long as we can to make as much of an impact as we can. So yeah, don't take your health for granted. If you feel like you need a checkup, go and get one. Always make sure you do an MOT every year. Don't listen to what your doctor says. They're just trying to save money so they can go and buy another Aston Martin V8.